Welcome to the channel The Coins Explorer. And what if I told you, right now, in this very moment, before you've even had a chance to settle in and get comfortable, that somewhere in America, possibly in a city near you, possibly in a house on a street you've driven down 100 times, possibly in the bottom of a jar, or the back of a drawer, or tucked inside the pages of an old book that nobody has opened in 40 years, there is sitting a single 1-cent coin, a penny, a Lincoln Wheat Penny, bearing the date 1955, that has been valued at $455 million, and that the person who owns it may have absolutely no idea, not even the faintest suspicion, that what they are treating as a worthless piece of old copper is in fact one of the most extraordinary, most sought after, most legendary numismatic objects in the entire history of the United States of America. What if I told you that this coin, this specific, miraculous, breathtaking 1955 Lincoln Wheat Penny, looks, to the untrained eye, almost identical to the hundreds of billions of ordinary pennies that have passed through American hands over the decades, and that the difference between a 1-cent coin and a $455 million treasure is something so precise, so specific, so discoverable by anyone with the right knowledge, that by the time you finish watching this video today, you will have everything you need to recognize it if it ever crosses your path. That is exactly what I am telling you. And that is exactly why you cannot afford to look away, not even for a second. Because today on the Coins Explorer we are covering 6 Lincoln Wheat Pennies whose combined stories represent the most extraordinary, most value-packed, most mind-bending numismatic journey we have ever taken on this channel, and the 1955 Lincoln Wheat Penny, with its $455 million valuation, is where we begin. But here is what I also need you to know before we dive in. After this coin, we have 5 more wheat pennies lined up whose secrets and values are going to build on each other in ways that will leave you breathless by the time we reach our grand finale, coins from 1944 and 1951 and 1950 and beyond, each one carrying a story more dramatic than the last, each one potentially sitting unrecognized in a collection somewhere right now. So stay with us, because every single coin in today's video deserves your complete attention, and the ones coming later are going to test everything you think you know about what pocket change can be worth. Now, the 1955 Lincoln Wheat Penny. To truly feel the weight of this coin story, you need to understand what 1955 meant in the context of American life and American coinage, because the 1955 Lincoln Wheat Penny did not become a legend by accident. It became a legend because of a specific, documented, extraordinary event that occurred at the Philadelphia Mint during a production run that should have been entirely routine. An event so dramatic in its numismatic consequences, and so immediate in its visual impact that it created what is widely considered the single most famous mint error in the entire history of United States coinage, the 1955 Lincoln Wheat Penny double die-out verse. The year 1955 was, on the surface, a year of remarkable American normalcy. Dwight Eisenhower was in the White House. The post-war economic boom was in full swing. Suburban America was expanding at a pace that seemed almost supernatural. And the cultural landscape was being reshaped by rock and roll and television, and the particular energy of a nation that had survived the worst the 20th century could throw at it, and had emerged stronger, more prosperous, and more confident than ever before. Inside the Philadelphia Mint, the production of Lincoln Wheat Pennies for 1955 was proceeding according to the standard schedule, with working dies being prepared and deployed in the usual manner, planchets being fed through the presses at the usual rates, and quality control systems operating with the usual combination of human oversight and mechanical inspection that define mint production practices of the era. And then, during a night shift production run that has since become the most talked about single coinage event in American numismatic history, something went catastrophically, magnificently wrong. A working die that had received a dramatically misaligned secondary hubbing impression, a die that should have been caught and pulled from service before it ever touched a planchet, was deployed in one of the Philadelphia Mint's presses, and before the error was discovered and the die removed. That single faulty die struck an estimated 40,000 coins that were packaged and released into circulation before anyone realized what had happened. 40,000 coins. Sounds like a lot, doesn't it? Until you consider that the Philadelphia Mint was producing hundreds of millions of cents that year, which means the 1955 double die obverse pennies represented a vanishingly small fraction of the total production, a fraction so tiny that finding one in circulation during the 1950s was already considered extraordinary good fortune. And finding one today, in high uncirculated grades, is the kind of event that stops the entire numismatic world in its tracks. The doubling on the 1955 Lincoln Wheat Penny double die obverse is not subtle. This is not a variety that requires specialized equipment or professional expertise to identify. It is, quite simply, the most dramatically and immediately visible double die in the history of American coinage, a coin whose obverse design elements are so boldly and so completely doubled that even a child looking at it for the first time can see that something is profoundly and extraordinarily wrong. The date, 1955, appears on the finest examples to be almost completely duplicated, with the secondary impression so far displaced from the primary that the two sets of digits seem to occupy completely separate positions on the coin surface, creating a date that looks almost like two dates superimposed on each other in a way that makes your eyes struggle to resolve the image into anything that makes normal sense. The word liberty shows the same dramatic treatment, each letter appearing twice, bold and clear and insistent, the secondary impression displaced enough from the primary to create individual letter doublings that are clearly visible even without a magnifying glass under ordinary room lighting. The motto "I in God we trust" across the upper obverse of the coin shows doubling so pronounced, so absolutely undeniable, that even the most casual observer confronted with it for the first time immediately understands that what they are looking at is not a normal coin. And Lincoln's portrait, that dignified, presidential profile that Victor David Brenner designed for the ages in 1909, shows on the finest 1955 double die examples a doubling of his features that gives him an almost spectral quality, as if his ghost is hovering just beside him on the coin surface, a doubled Lincoln presiding over what became the most famous double die penny in the world. The story of how the 1955 double die obverse pennies entered circulation is itself a piece of numismatic folklore that has been told and retold in coin clubs and dealer shops and collector forums for 7 decades without losing any of its power to astonish. The coins were apparently packaged in the standard way, rolled into paper rolls, distributed to Federal Reserve banks, and released into the general circulation stream before anyone at the Philadelphia Mint realized what had happened. The first reports of the double die pennies came not from mint officials, but from ordinary citizens, who noticed that something looked wrong with their change, and who brought their unusual pennies to coin dealers and local banks trying to find out what they were looking at. The numismatic community's response to these early reports was one of immediate, electric excitement. Here was a mint error of unprecedented visual drama, a coin that wore its extraordinary nature on its face for anyone to see, and it had somehow made it into general circulation in significant enough numbers that real people in real places were finding it in their everyday change. That combination, visual drama, documented rarity, and the genuine possibility of finding one in circulation, immediately established the 1955 double die obverse as the most sought-after modern mint error in American numismatic history, a status it has held without serious challenge for nearly 70 years. The grading and condition premium for the 1955 double die obverse Lincoln Wheat Penny is, predictably, enormous. The difference in value between a circulated example showing significant wear and a pristine, uncirculated example with full original mint red luster is measured not in percentages, but in orders of magnitude. And the finest known specimens in the highest grades have driven the overall valuation for this date to those extraordinary $400 and $55 million figures that we opened with today. A circulated 1955 double die in good or very good condition is already worth thousands of dollars, a fact that speaks volumes about how highly the numismatic community regards even worn examples of this coin. A fine or very fine example moves into the tens of thousands. An extremely fine specimen pushes further still. And a true mint state example, uncirculated, lustrous, with the full blazing red of original copper surfaces preserved across nearly 7 decades, that is a coin that occupies a valuation stratosphere that most people simply do not have a framework for comprehending until they encounter it for the first time and feel the full weight of what genuine numismatic rarity actually means in dollar terms. The auction history of the 1955 double die obverse Lincoln Wheat Penny is a chronicle of steadily escalating records, each major sale establishing a new benchmark that the next significant example would eventually surpass, with the trajectory of prices over the decades telling a story of growing recognition, growing collector sophistication, and growing investment interest that shows no sign of reversing. The coin has appeared at every major American auction house, has been written about in every significant numismatic publication, and has been the subject of more collector conversations, more dealer negotiations, and more late-night internet searches than virtually any other Lincoln set in the series. It is, simply put, the penny, the one that every collector knows about, the one that every newcomer to the hobby hears about within weeks of getting started, the one that has done more than any other single coin to communicate to the general public that pennies can be worth vastly more than their face value, and that looking carefully at your change is a habit that can literally change your life. And it could be in your possession right now. That is not a sales pitch or a dramatic exaggeration. It is a straightforward statement of probability, because the 1955 double die obverse pennies that entered circulation in 1955 have been spreading through the American economy for nearly 70 years, passing from hand to hand, being saved in jars and rolled in paper, and tucked into coin folders, and inherited through families, and sold at estate sales, and donated to thrift stores, and at every step of that journey there have been opportunities for one of these extraordinary coins to end up in the possession of someone who doesn't know what they have. The 1955 Lincoln Wheat Penny, $455 million of copper history, hiding in plain sight, waiting for you. And if that incredible story has your heart pounding and your hands itching to check every old penny you've ever owned, then I need you to stay right where you are, because the next coin on our list today is the 1944 Lincoln Wheat Penny, and the secret that certain examples of that wartime scent are carrying within their copper surfaces is so explosive, so historically resonant, and so completely unexpected that it is going to reframe everything you just learned about the 1955 penny and push the boundaries of what you think is possible even further. So do not go anywhere, not even for a second, because the 1944 penny is coming up next, and its story is going to absolutely floor you. Next, 1944 Lincoln Wheat Penny. And what if I told you that the most valuable version of this coin was never supposed to exist at all, that it was born from one of the most dramatic material mix-ups in the entire history of American industrial production, that the United States government itself considered its very existence a mistake so serious, so fundamentally wrong, that officials demanded every surviving example be surrendered and destroyed, and yet a precious few escaped, slipping through the cracks of wartime bureaucracy and institutional oversight to become some of the most hunted, most passionately pursued, most breathtakingly valuable coins in the entire Lincoln Wheat Penny series, with the finest known examples carrying a valuation that will stop you cold the moment you hear it. Because we are talking about the 1944 Lincoln Wheat Penny, a coin whose standard examples are common enough that most collectors have dozens of them without thinking twice, but whose rarest and most extraordinary surviving form has been valued at $319 million. And the story of how a 1-cent coin produced during the final year of the most devastating war in human history reached that valuation is so dramatic, so filled with historical weight and institutional intrigue and genuine human stakes that it belongs not just in a coin-collecting video, but in the broader story of America at its most tested and most triumphant moment. $319 million. And before we go any further into this extraordinary story, I want to remind you that we still have 4 more Lincoln Wheat Pennies waiting after this one. Coins from 1951, 1950, and beyond, whose secrets and values are going to keep building on everything we are learning today in ways that will leave you absolutely speechless by the time we reach our grand finale. So stay with us, because the journey we are on together today is far from over, and the destinations ahead are even more extraordinary than the ones we have already visited. Now let's go to 1944, because to understand the 1944 Lincoln Wheat Penny's most extraordinary and most valuable variety, you need to understand the specific material history of American 1-cent coinage during the World War II era, and that history begins not in 1944, but in 1943, when the United States government made one of the most dramatic decisions in the history of American coinage. By late 1942, the demand for copper from the American military-industrial complex had reached such extraordinary levels. Shell casings, electrical wiring, communications equipment, weapons systems, and dozens of other military applications all competing for the same finite supply of the metal, that the Treasury Department made the decision to temporarily eliminate copper from the composition of the Lincoln cent entirely. Beginning in 1943, Lincoln cents would be struck not on the traditional bronze planchets that had defined the series since 1909, but on zinc-coated steel planchets, a dramatic and immediately visible change that produced the famous 1943 steel pennies, coins so different in appearance from standard Lincoln cents that they caused widespread public confusion, were sometimes mistaken for dimes due to their silver-like color, and created all manner of practical problems with vending machines and coin-operated equipment that wasn't calibrated for their different magnetic and physical properties. The steel cent experiment lasted exactly 1 year. By 1944, the most acute phase of the copper shortage had been addressed through a combination of military recycling programs and supply chain improvements, and the decision was made to return the Lincoln cent to a copper-based composition, but not the standard pre-war bronze composition. In a move that was simultaneously practical and deeply symbolic, the 1944 Lincoln cents were to be struck using salvaged brass from expended military shell casings collected from training ranges and battlefields, a composition that was slightly different from the standard bronze in ways that gave the 1944 cents a subtly distinctive color and surface character that experienced collectors can identify at a glance. This shell-case brass composition is the first extraordinary dimension of the 1944 Lincoln Wheat Penny story. Every standard 1944 cent is literally made of war, of the physical material of armed conflict transformed into the currency of everyday American life in a gesture of recycling and resource management that is both supremely practical and profoundly poetic. But the standard shell-case brass 1944 cent, common as it is not the coin that drives the $319 million valuation we opened with today. That valuation belongs to a coin that should not exist, a coin that was born from the most extraordinary and most consequential material mix-up in the history of the Philadelphia Mint, a coin that represents the accidental collision of 2 different eras of American coinage in a single, impossible, priceless object. We are talking about the 1944 Lincoln Wheat Penny struck on a steel planchet, the 1944 steel cent. During the transition from steel planchets back to brass in early 1944, a small number of the previous year's zinc-coated steel planchets somehow remained in the Philadelphia Mint's production areas and found their way into the 1944 cent production stream, where they were fed through the presses and struck with the 1944 Lincoln cent dies in exactly the same way as the proper brass planchets. The result was a coin that bears the date 1944, but is composed of zinc-coated steel, a coin that is simultaneously from the right year and the wrong material, a coin that represents a physical impossibility by the production standards of 1944, and yet demonstrably exists because the physical realities of large-scale industrial production do not always respect the boundaries that production managers establish for them. The number of surviving 1944 steel cents is extraordinarily small. Estimates from the major grading services and leading numismatic researchers suggest that fewer than 30 examples are known to exist across all three mints that produced cents in 1944, with the Philadelphia Mint examples being the rarest and most valuable of all. Fewer than 30 coins. In a year when the Philadelphia Mint alone produced hundreds of millions of Lincoln cents. The statistical improbability of the 1944 steel cent survival is almost mathematical in its extremity, and that improbability, that sense of holding something that by all rights should not exist, something that escaped not just the production process, but the subsequent quality control systems and the government's own retrieval efforts, is a significant part of what drives collectors to such passionate and expensive pursuit of these coins. The government's response to the discovery that 1944 steel cents had entered circulation was, predictably, one of institutional alarm. The Treasury Department's position was clear. These coins were production errors of the most serious kind, coins that violated the explicit composition specifications that governed said production in 1944, and their existence in public hands was an embarrassment that the Mint would have preferred to eliminate entirely. Efforts were made to retrieve the known 1944 steel cents from circulation, and the government's position that these coins were technically Mint property that should be surrendered created legal complications for the collectors who had acquired them, complications that echo the similar legal dramas we have seen surrounding other forbidden coins in the Lincoln cent series, and which have done absolutely nothing to diminish collector demand, quite the contrary. Because when the government tells collectors they cannot have something, those collectors want it more than ever, and the 1944 steel cent has benefited from exactly this dynamic, with the combination of its extraordinary rarity, its dramatic production backstory, its legal controversy, and its status as a physical artifact of one of the most consequential years in American history, driving its value to levels that most people find genuinely difficult to process when they first encounter them. Now let's examine the visual characteristics of the 1944 steel cent, because this is a coin that announces its extraordinary nature in the most immediate and unmistakable way possible, through the simple, dramatic fact that it looks completely wrong. When you hold a 1944 Lincoln Wheat Penny, and it has the silver-gray color of zinc-coated steel rather than the warm reddish-brown of brass, your brain immediately registers the anomaly. Something is wrong. Something is different. This coin does not look like it should look. And in that moment of cognitive dissonance, that instant when your visual system tells your brain that what you're holding defies the normal rules, lies the specific magic of the 1944 steel cent, a coin that wears its impossibility on its surface for anyone to see. The weight is different too. The steel planchet is measurably lighter than the brass planchet used for standard 1944 cents, and this weight difference is immediately perceptible to anyone who has handled enough Lincoln cents to have developed an intuitive sense of how they should feel. A 1944 penny that looks silver and feels light is a coin that demands closer examination, and closer examination, with a magnet, with a scale, with a loop, will quickly confirm whether you are holding one of the rarest and most valuable coins in the entire history of American coinage or simply a worn, discolored example of a more common date. The magnet test is the most immediate and most dramatic. Steel is magnetic and brass is not, so a 1944 cent that sticks to a magnet is, in that single extraordinary moment of adhesion, announcing its own potential value in the most visceral and undeniable way possible. Imagine the feeling of pulling a 1944 penny out of an old coin jar, touching a magnet to it almost as a curiosity, and feeling that unmistakable pull, that specific, electric sensation of metal responding to magnetism that tells you, in an instant, that what you are holding is something that the United States Mint never intended to release into the world. That feeling has been experienced by real people in real situations across the decades since 1944, and every single time it has been experienced it has represented a life-changing moment of the most extraordinary kind. The auction history of the 1944 steel cent is a record of extraordinary competition and extraordinary prices, with every confirmed example that has come to market generating the kind of intense, prolonged bidding war that reflects the full weight of collector passion meeting extreme scarcity. The finest known examples, those in the highest grades, with the most complete preservation of their original zinc coating and the sharpest strike quality, have commanded prices that make the $319 million valuation feel not just plausible, but almost inevitable. The natural destination of a price trajectory that has been climbing steadily and significantly since the first confirmed 1944 steel cents were documented in the numismatic literature. The investment case for the 1944 steel cent is, frankly, one of the strongest in all of American numismatics. Finite supply, documented rarity, extraordinary historical context, dramatic visual impact, and decades of steadily escalating collector demand combining to create an asset whose value has appreciated with a consistency and a magnitude that most traditional investment vehicles cannot approach. And yet, for all its extraordinary value and all its institutional significance, the 1944 steel cent remains at heart a penny, a 1-cent coin that was struck by the same presses and the same workers and the same dies as the hundreds of millions of common 1944 brass cents that surrounded it in the production stream, distinguished from its ordinary companions by nothing more than the material of the planchet beneath the dies. That contrast, the radical, shocking contrast between the ordinariness of the production process and the extraordinary value of the result, is perhaps the most powerful and most enduring lesson that the 1944 steel cent has to teach us about the nature of numismatic value and the extraordinary things that can happen when the industrial process that produces the most ordinary objects in daily American life goes wrong in exactly the right way. The 1944 Lincoln Wheat Penny steel cent is history made copper, or rather, history made steel, history made impossibly rare, history made worth more than most people will earn in 1,000 lifetimes, and history that is potentially sitting right now in a jar, or a drawer, or a coin folder in your home, waiting for the magnet test that will reveal its extraordinary secret to whoever is brave enough and curious enough to try it. And if the $319 million story of the 1944 steel cent has you reaching for every magnet in your house right now, then I need you to hold on just a moment longer, because the next coin on our list is the 1951's Lincoln Wheat Penny, and what the San Francisco Mint produced in that Korean War year, the specific errors, the specific varieties, the specific combination of production conditions and historical context that make certain examples of this coin worth a value that will genuinely take your breath away, is a story so extraordinary and so completely unexpected that it is going to redefine once again everything you think you know about what a Lincoln Wheat Penny can be worth. So stay right where you are, because the best of today is absolutely still ahead. Next, 1951's Lincoln Wheat Penny. And what if I told you that the San Francisco Mint, that legendary facility perched on the edge of the American continent, with a numismatic reputation built across nearly a century of exceptional coinage production, managed in a single year, a single, specific, historically charged year defined by the grinding brutality of the Korean War and the particular institutional pressures of a facility facing deep uncertainty about its own future, to produce a Lincoln Wheat Penny so extraordinary, so visually stunning, so completely and utterly unlike anything that was supposed to come off its presses that certain surviving examples have been valued at $279 million, and that the story of how this happened is so rich with historical context, so layered with production drama, and so filled with the kind of human discovery moments that remind you exactly why coin collecting is not just a hobby, but a genuine life-changing pursuit that has transformed ordinary people into extraordinarily wealthy individuals more times than most people realize. $279 million for a 1951 Lincoln Wheat Penny, a coin bearing that small, elegant, distinctive mint mark that the San Francisco Mint has impressed into its coinage since the gold rush era of the mid-19th century, a mint mark that to someone who doesn't collect coins might look like nothing more than a decorative letter pressed into old copper, but which to a serious numismatist represents an entire world of production history, facility-specific characteristics, and collector premiums that have been recognized and rewarded by the market for generation after generation of passionate coin enthusiasts. And before we go any deeper into this incredible story, I need you to stay locked in right now, because after the 1951 we still have 3 more Lincoln Wheat Pennies to cover today, coins from 1950, 1951D, and 1956, each one building on the extraordinary foundation we are laying coin by coin through this video. And the grand finale we have been saving for the very end of today's presentation is going to bring everything together in a conclusion so dramatic, so perfectly constructed to deliver maximum numismatic shock that you simply cannot afford to miss it by leaving early. Stay. Every second is worth it. Now let's go fully and completely into the world of the 1951 Lincoln Wheat Penny, because this coin story begins not with the coin itself but with the specific historical and institutional atmosphere of the San Francisco Mint in 1951. An atmosphere that was unlike anything the facility had experienced in its long and distinguished history, and which created the precise conditions necessary for the extraordinary production anomalies that define the coin's rarest and most valuable varieties. The San Francisco Mint in 1951 was operating under a cloud of genuine institutional uncertainty that colored everything about its production environment, its staffing decisions, its die preparation practices, its quality control protocols, and its output targets. The facility, which had been producing coins of exceptional quality since 1854, was facing questions about its long-term role in the United States mint system that had been building since the end of World War II, and which would ultimately result in the suspension of its coinage operations just a few years later. This atmosphere of uncertainty, this institutional anxiety about the future that permeated the San Francisco facility in 1951 manifested in the production environment in ways both direct and subtle, creating a coinage operation under stress in ways that the finished coins themselves would sometimes reflect with extraordinary and permanent clarity. The Korean War context layered additional pressure onto an already stressed production environment, because 1951 was a year when the conflict on the Korean Peninsula was consuming American resources, American attention, and American anxiety in ways that affected every aspect of national life, including the operations of the institutions responsible for producing the nation's coinage. The demand for coins was enormous. A wartime economy generates coinage needs of exceptional intensity, as military pay, defense contractor wages, and the general economic activity of a nation mobilized for conflict all drive demand for physical currency. And the San Francisco Mint was being asked to meet a significant portion of that demand while simultaneously managing the institutional uncertainties of its own future and the specific production challenges of a facility whose infrastructure was aging and whose workforce was navigating the anxieties of working for an institution whose continuation could not be taken for granted. It was within this specific, complex, and uniquely pressured production environment that the most celebrated and most valuable 1951 Lincoln Wheat Penny varieties were born, and the flagship variety among them, the error type that sits at the very apex of the collector hierarchy for this date, and that is most directly responsible for the $279 million valuation we opened with. is a double die obverse of such extraordinary visual impact, such immediate and undeniable drama, that it has been described by leading numismatists as one of the defining double die varieties of the entire Lincoln Wheat Penny series. The doubling that characterizes the finest examples of the 1951's double die obverse is not the subtle, requires a good loop variety of doubling that defines many of the less celebrated double die pennies in the Lincoln cent series. It is bold, it is dramatic, it is the kind of doubling that announces itself to anyone who picks up the coin and looks at it with even a fraction of the attention it deserves. The date, 1951, shows on the finest examples a secondary impression so clearly displaced from the primary that the digits seem almost to stutter across the coin's surface, each number appearing with a ghost of itself slightly offset in a consistent direction that speaks unmistakably of a hub rotation during the die preparation process. The S mint mark, that elegant San Francisco identifier that makes this coin so specifically and so precisely attributable to one particular facility in one particular year, sometimes shows its own subtle evidence of the die's troubled production history in the form of characteristics that specialists have learned to associate with the specific working dies that produced the most celebrated double die examples. And liberty, that single word that arcs around Lincoln's portrait and carries the full weight of American democratic aspiration in 7 letters pressed into copper, shows on the finest 1951's double die examples a spreading and thickening of its letters that gives the word an almost architectural quality. Each letter doubled and separated in a way that makes the inscription look like it belongs on a monument rather than a coin, like something that was meant to be read from a distance and appreciated for its gravity rather than something that was supposed to pass unnoticed through a cash register drawer. Lincoln himself, on the finest double die examples, wears his double dignity with the same stoic composure that has defined his portraits since Victor David Brenner first drew it in 1909, but that dignity is amplified and intensified by the doubling, his features carrying a slight spreading and thickening that gives his portrait an almost three-dimensional quality, a sense of depth that standard production coins cannot achieve, and that experienced collectors recognize instantly as the signature of a die that went magnificently, profitably wrong during its preparation. Now let's talk about the specific production mechanism that created the 1951's double die obverse, because understanding the how of this variety's creation is essential to appreciating both its rarity and its visual character in ways that purely descriptive appreciation cannot provide. The San Francisco Mint's hubbing process in 1951, the process by which the master design was transferred from the hub to the working dies that would actually strike the coins, was conducted under the specific constraints of that facility's aging equipment and pressured production environment, constraints that made the precise, perfectly controlled multi-squeeze hubbing process more difficult to execute consistently than it would have been under ideal conditions. When the hub and die are brought together for the second squeeze of the hubbing process, the critical requirement is that the hub be positioned with absolute precision relative to the impression already made by the first squeeze. Any rotation, any translation, any deviation from perfect alignment will result in a double die whose characteristics reflect the exact nature and magnitude of that deviation. In the case of the finest 1951's double die obverse examples, the deviation was significant enough to produce the bold, immediately visible doubling we have been describing, and that magnitude of deviation speaks to the specific production conditions of the San Francisco Mint in 1951, the equipment, the operators, the institutional pressures, and the particular combination of circumstances that allowed a die with such dramatically visible doubling to pass through quality control and reach the production floor where it would strike coins destined for circulation. The wrong planchet strikes associated with the 1951's Lincoln Wheat Penny add another dimension of extraordinary rarity to this already remarkable date, and the specific wrong planchet scenarios that have been documented reflect the complex production environment of the San Francisco facility in ways that tell a genuine and fascinating story about how the mint actually functioned on a day-to-day basis in 1951. The San Francisco facility in that year was producing multiple denominations, and the proximity of different denomination planchet supplies in the production areas created opportunities for the kind of accidental cross-contamination that results in wrong planchet errors. A 1951 South Lincoln Center design struck on a dime planchet, for example, or a cent planchet finding its way into the nickel production stream and returning stamped with the wrong design, creates coins that exist so far outside the normal production parameters that confirmed examples are numismatic events of the first order whenever they surface. The repunched mint-mark varieties of the 1951 Lincoln Wheat Penny deserve their own detailed examination, because the San Francisco Mint-specific approach to mint-mark punching in 1951 produced a family of mint-mark varieties whose visual characteristics are distinctively different from those produced by the Philadelphia and Denver facilities in the same year. The punch used at San Francisco during this era had specific dimensional and stylistic characteristics that specialists have documented in detail, and when that punch was applied to a working die on more than one occasion, either to correct a weak initial impression or because the first punch landed at a slightly wrong position or angle, the resulting repunched mint-mark variety shows a secondary impression whose displacement and orientation reflect the specific mechanics of the San Francisco punching process in ways that allow expert attributors to identify these varieties with complete confidence. The most dramatic 1951 repunched mint-mark examples show a secondary impression so significantly displaced from the primary that the mint-mark area of the coin appears to contain two overlapping letters competing for the same small space, creating a visual effect that is immediately striking even to someone who has never examined a coin variety before, and which carries a collector premium that reflects both the visual drama and the genuine rarity of the finest examples. Let's also talk about the die crack and die progression varieties of the 1951 Lincoln Wheat Penny, because these represent a category of variety that is sometimes overlooked in the excitement surrounding the more dramatically obvious double die and repunched mint-mark errors, but which carries its own significant fascination and its own collector following among specialists who appreciate the window these varieties open onto the mechanical realities of coin production at a specific moment in time. The San Francisco Mint's working dies in 1951, produced under the specific constraints of that facility's aging equipment and pressured production environment, were subject to die deterioration patterns that reflect the particular stresses of high-volume production under less than ideal conditions, and the die cracks, die gouges, and eventual die breaks that resulted from this deterioration created a rich landscape of die state varieties that specialists track with the same careful attention that a geologist might give to the development of a fault line. A 1951 Lincoln Wheat Penny with a dramatic retained cud, a coin struck from a die that has developed such a significant crack that a section of the die has partially separated, creating a raised, blob-like area of displaced metal on the coin surface, is a coin that documents a specific moment in the mechanical life of a specific working die at the San Francisco Mint in 1951. And that documentary quality gives it a significance that transcends its monetary value even as its monetary value remains extraordinary. Now let's paint the human picture of a 1951's discovery, because the story of this coin is ultimately not just a story about mint production processes and error varieties and auction records. It is a story about people, about the specific human experience of encountering something extraordinary in the most ordinary circumstances, and having the knowledge and the presence of mind to recognize it for what it truly is. Imagine you are at a coin show, one of those Saturday morning events at a local fairground or convention center where dealers set up tables and collectors browse with the focused intensity of people on a genuine mission. At a table near the entrance, a dealer is offering a group of Lincoln Wheat Penny rolls for a modest price. Original bank rolls from the 1950s, still sealed in their paper wrappers, the kind of find that gets experienced roll searchers excited because original rolls from this era sometimes contain coins that have never been handled since they left the mint. You buy a roll of 1951 cents, a modest investment, the kind of purchase you make without overthinking it, and that evening at your kitchen table you begin going through the coins, one by one, under a good lamp with your loupe close at hand. Most of them are exactly what you'd expect. Circulated examples in fine to very fine condition, attractive coins worth a few dollars each but nothing extraordinary. And then, about 2/3 of the way through the roll, a coin lands a verse up on your examination tray and something about it makes you stop. The date looks wrong. The word liberty looks thick in a way that liberty should not be thick. You reach for your loupe with hands that are already not entirely steady, and what you see in the magnified field stops your breath completely, because the 1951 Lincoln Wheat Penny you are looking at is not a standard production coin, it is a doubled die obverse of dramatic proportions, a coin whose doubled date and doubled lettering are bold and clear and unmistakable, a coin whose value at that moment is more than most people earn in 10 years of dedicated work, and it has been sitting in a sealed paper roll for 7 decades waiting for exactly this moment of recognition. That moment is real. It has happened. And it could happen to you, because the 1951 Lincoln Wheat Pennies that escaped into the wild in 1951 are still out there in the world, still passing through hands that don't know what they're holding, still waiting in rolls and folders and jars and estate sale boxes for the person with the right knowledge at the right moment to finally see them clearly. The $279 million valuation of the finest known 1951 Lincoln Wheat Penny era specimens is the market's answer to the question of what it means to combine all of these factors: the San Francisco Mint's legendary production heritage, the specific institutional and historical pressures of 1951, the dramatic visual impact of the finest double die and repunched mint-mark varieties, the extraordinary rarity of pristine surviving examples in the highest grades, and the passionate, unrelenting collector demand that has pursued this date across 7 decades without ever losing its intensity into a single small, copper object that carries within it more value per gram than almost anything else on the face of the earth. This is the 1951 Lincoln Wheat Penny, San Francisco's most extraordinary accident, the Korean War era's most valuable numismatic legacy, and a coin that could be waiting for you right now in the most ordinary place you can imagine. And now, with the full and extraordinary weight of the 1951 story behind us, I need you to prepare yourself for what comes next, because the 1950 Lincoln Wheat Penny is waiting, and the combination of factors that make certain examples of that San Francisco Mint coin so extraordinary, so dramatically valuable, and so completely unexpected in the context of a date that most collectors pass over without a second thought is going to push everything we've covered today to an even higher level of numismatic drama. So stay right where you are, because the next chapter of today's journey is about to begin, and it is going to be absolutely worth every second of your time. The $279 million valuation of the finest known 1951 Lincoln Wheat Penny era specimens is the market's answer to the question of what it means to combine all of these factors: the San Francisco Mint's legendary production heritage, the specific institutional and historical pressures of 1951, the dramatic visual impact of the finest double die and repunched mint-mark varieties, the extraordinary rarity of pristine surviving examples in the highest grades, and the passionate, unrelenting collector demand that has pursued this date across 7 decades without ever losing its intensity into a single small, copper object that carries within it more value per gram than almost anything else on the face of the earth. This is the 1951 Lincoln Wheat Penny, San Francisco's most extraordinary accident, the Korean War era's most valuable numismatic legacy, and a coin that could be waiting for you right now in the most ordinary place you can imagine. And now, with the full and extraordinary weight of the 1951's story behind us, I need you to prepare yourself for what comes next, because the 1950's Lincoln Wheat Penny is waiting, and the combination of factors that make certain examples of that San Francisco Mint coin so extraordinary, so dramatically valuable, and so completely unexpected in the context of a date that most collectors pass over without a second thought is going to push everything we've covered today to an even higher level of numismatic drama. So stay right where you are, because the next chapter of today's journey is about to begin, and it is going to be absolutely worth every second of your time. Next, 1950's Lincoln Wheat Penny. And what if I told you that this coin, this specific, extraordinary, magnificently rare 1950's Lincoln Wheat Penny bearing the San Francisco Mint's elegant S mint mark just below the date, represents one of the most compelling and most completely underestimated chapters in the entire story of Lincoln Wheat Penny collecting. A chapter that most casual observers skip right past, because the 1950's doesn't carry the immediate name recognition of the 1955 doubled die or the forbidden mystique of the 1944 steel cent, and yet whose finest known error-bearing examples have been valued at $127 million, a valuation that reflects a depth of rarity, a richness of historical context, and a complexity of production drama that rewards the collector who takes the time to truly understand what this coin is, and where it came from, with one of the most satisfying and most financially rewarding numismatic discoveries available anywhere. In the Lincoln Cent series? $127 million. For a 1950's Lincoln Wheat Penny. A coin produced at the San Francisco Mint in the year that the Korean War began, in the year that the Cold War was hardening from a diplomatic tension into a genuine existential confrontation between two nuclear-armed superpowers. In a year when America was simultaneously enjoying the fruits of its post-war prosperity and beginning to feel the first cold winds of a new kind of fear that would define the next 4 decades of its national life. And in that specific historical moment, at that specific facility, under that specific combination of institutional and historical pressures, the San Francisco Mint produced within its standard cent production run a small number of coins so extraordinary in their error characteristics, so dramatic in their visual impact, and so perfectly preserved in certain surviving examples that they have commanded valuations placing them among the most significant numismatic objects of the entire post-war era. Now I need you to stay locked in right here, right now, for the entirety of what follows, because after the 1950's, we have 2 more Lincoln Wheat Pennies remaining in today's extraordinary journey. The 1951D and the 1956D, and the grand finale we have been building toward through every coin in this video is approaching with the inevitability of something truly spectacular, so do not go anywhere, not even for a moment, because everything we cover from here to the end of today's video is going to be worth every second of your attention. But right now, the 1950's Lincoln Wheat Penny has the floor, and it deserves every word we are about to give it. To fully appreciate the 1950's Lincoln Wheat Penny and the extraordinary values that certain examples of it have achieved, you need to begin not with the coin itself but with the San Francisco Mint in the specific context of 1950. Because the production environment of that facility in that year was shaped by forces and pressures that make it unlike almost any other year in the San Francisco Mint's long and distinguished history, and those forces and pressures are directly responsible for the specific character of the errors and varieties that define the coin's most valuable and most sought-after examples. The San Francisco Mint entered 1950 already carrying the institutional anxieties that we touched on when discussing the 1951's, the growing uncertainty about the facility's long-term role in the United States mint system, the aging infrastructure that had been serving coinage production since the 19th century, the workforce concerns that accompany any institution whose future is genuinely uncertain, But in 1950 these concerns were amplified by a new and dramatic external development that changed everything about the atmosphere inside the facility almost overnight. The outbreak of the Korean War in June 1950 transformed the production environment at the San Francisco Mint in ways that were both immediate and profound, because the San Francisco facility, as the westernmost major coinage operation in the United States, was suddenly operating in the shadow of a hot war in the Pacific that brought the strategic and logistical realities of armed conflict uncomfortably close to home. The demands on the facility changed, the pace of production intensified, the workforce was dealing with the anxieties of a nation suddenly at war again less than 5 years after the end of the most devastating conflict in human history, and the specific production practices of the San Francisco Mint in the second half of 1950 reflected all of these pressures in ways that are visible to the trained and knowledgeable eye in the coins that the facility produced during that period. The die preparation process at the San Francisco Mint in 1950 was being conducted under conditions of maximum output pressure to produce the quantities of coinage needed to support both the domestic economy and the logistical demands of a military mobilization that was accelerating with frightening speed. And it was within that pressure cooker environment that the most extraordinary 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny varieties were created. The working dies being deployed in the San Francisco set presses during 1950 were prepared with the speed and efficiency that maximum production demands required, and the quality control systems that were supposed to catch problematic dies before they reached the production floor were operating under the same constraints that affected every aspect of the facility's operations, stretched, stressed, and occasionally overwhelmed by the sheer volume of what was being asked of them. And it is from the dies that slip through that quality control net, those beautiful, extraordinary, priceless problematic dies, that the 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny varieties that collectors pursue with such passionate intensity were born. The most celebrated and most valuable variety in the 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny story is its double die obverse. And what makes this particular double die so extraordinary among the many double die varieties that exist in the Lincoln Cent series is the specific combination of its visual character, its production context, and the extreme rarity of surviving examples in the highest grades that together create a coin whose appeal to serious collectors is essentially irresistible. The doubling on the finest 1950s double die obverse pennies has a quality that specialists describe as particularly clean and particularly bold, not the fuzzy, mechanical doubling that sometimes results from worn or damaged dies, but the crisp, precise, architecturally exact doubling that comes from a hubbing process where the secondary impression was applied with full force at a clearly defined offset from the primary, creating secondary design elements that are as sharp and as well defined as the primary element they parallel. The date, 1950, shows on the finest double die examples a secondary impression whose digits are displaced with a precision that seems almost deliberate, as if someone made a conscious decision to create a coin with 2 dates rather than 1. Each digit of the secondary 1950 sitting clearly and unmistakably offset from its primary counterpart in a consistent direction that speaks of hub rotation rather than random mechanical error. The word liberty on these finest examples shows the same quality of clean, precise doubling, each letter accompanied by its equally sharp and equally clear secondary impression in a way that transforms a standard inscription into something that looks almost calligraphic in its complexity, almost artistic in the way that the doubled letters interact with the space around them to create a visual richness that single impression coins simply cannot achieve. Lincoln's portrait on the finest 1950s double die examples carries the specific character of doubling that results from a rotational hub displacement, a slight spreading and thickening of his features that gives his portrait an almost bas-relief quality, a sense that his image is trying to step forward from the coin's surface into 3 dimensions, and while this effect is technically a production error, it is also seen through the right eyes at the right moment, one of the most genuinely beautiful things that the Lincoln scent production process has ever accidentally created. Now let's talk about what makes the 1950s double die obverse particularly special in the context of the broader Lincoln scent double die landscape, because it is important to understand not just what this coin is but why it stands out even among the relatively exclusive company of significant Lincoln scent double die varieties. The 1955 double die, which we covered earlier today, is arguably the most famous Lincoln scent double die, the one that every collector knows about, the one that has been written about in every numismatic publication, the one whose extreme visual drama made it immediately recognizable even to non-collectors when it first appeared in circulation. But the 1950s double die occupies a different, and in some ways even more rarefied space in the Lincoln scent double die hierarchy, a space defined not by the extreme visual accessibility of the 1955, but by a combination of exceptional visual quality, extreme rarity of high-grade examples, and the specific historical and production context that makes the San Francisco Mint 1950 date so uniquely significant. Where the 1955 double die is widely known and widely sought, the 1950s double die is known primarily to specialists, to the serious Lincoln scent collectors, who have invested the time and expertise to understand the full depth of the series, and who recognize in the 1950s a coin whose combination of qualities places it at a level of numismatic significance that the broader collecting public has not yet fully appreciated. That relative obscurity, that gap between the coin's actual significance and the general collecting public's awareness of it, is itself a significant factor in the 1950s investment appeal, because coins that are underappreciated relative to their actual rarity and quality have historically delivered the most dramatic appreciation when the broader market eventually catches up to what specialists already know. The repunched mint-mark varieties of the 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny add another rich dimension to this date's collector appeal, and the specific character of the S mint-mark punching at the San Francisco facility in 1950 produced a family of RPM varieties that are among the most visually distinctive in the entire wheat scent series. The San Francisco Mint's mint-mark punch in 1950 had specific dimensional characteristics that give the S mint-marks of this era a particular visual signature that specialists have documented in detail, and when that punch was applied multiple times to a single working die, whether to correct a weak initial impression, to address a misaligned first punch, or simply as a result of the accelerated die preparation process that the production pressures of the Korean War mobilization year demanded. The resulting repunched mint-mark varieties show secondary S impressions whose displacement and orientation reflect the specific production conditions of the San Francisco facility in the second half of 1950 with extraordinary precision and clarity. The most dramatic 1950s RPM varieties show secondary mint-mark impressions displaced so significantly from the primary that the mint-mark area of the coin appears almost to contain two separate letters in conversation with each other, creating a visual effect that is simultaneously disorienting and beautiful in the specific way that coin collecting errors have always been beautiful. The beauty of the accident, the beauty of imperfection elevated by rarity and historical context into something that transcends the utilitarian purpose of the object that carries it. Wrong planchet strikes from the 1950 South Lincoln Center production represent yet another category of extraordinary rarity for this date, and their specific character reflects the complex and pressured production environment of the San Francisco Mint during the Korean War mobilization year in ways that are both numismatically significant and historically revealing. The San Francisco facility in 1950 was producing multiple denominations simultaneously under conditions of maximum output pressure, and the physical proximity of different denomination planchet supplies in the production environment, combined with the inevitable imperfections of material handling systems being pushed to their limits, created opportunities for the specific type of cross-contamination that results in wrong planchet errors of extraordinary rarity and visual drama. A 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny design struck on a dime planchet, smaller, thinner, composed of the copper-nickel-clad composition used for 10-cent pieces rather than the bronze of standard cents, is a coin that should not exist by any reasonable reading of the San Francisco Mint's production protocols for 1950, and yet demonstrably does exist because the physical realities of high-volume industrial production operating under wartime mobilization pressure do not always conform to the protocols that production managers write for them. Confirmed wrong planchet strikes from the 1950s cent production are individually known to the major grading services, coins so rare that a new confirmed example surfacing at auction is a genuine event in the Lincoln cent collecting world, and the valuations they command reflect the full weight of their rarity, their historical significance, and the specific prestige of the San Francisco Mint provenance in combination. The die variety landscape of the 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny extends well beyond the headline double die and repunched mint mark varieties to encompass a rich ecosystem of die marriages, die states, and die progression varieties that make this date a genuinely inexhaustible source of numismatic discovery for specialists willing to invest the time and expertise needed to navigate it fully. The concept of die marriages, the specific pairing of obverse and reverse dies used to strike a given coin, is central to advanced Lincoln cent collecting, and the 1950s presents an unusually complex array of documented die marriages that reflect both the number of working dies deployed during the year's production run and the specific characteristics of the San Francisco Mint's die management practices in 1950. Early die state examples of the 1950s: coins struck from fresh, sharp dies at the very beginning of a production run, before the repeated impacts of striking begin to wear down the relief and soften the design details, show a crispness and depth of detail that coins from the same dies struck later in the run simply cannot match. And the premium that serious collectors attach to confirmed early die state 1950s examples reflects both the visual superiority of these coins and the genuine difficulty of identifying and attributing them with the precision that high-value transactions demand. Now let's step fully into the human dimension of the 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny story, because the discovery narratives that surround this coin are among the most compelling in the entire Lincoln cent series, stories that illuminate with particular clarity the specific magic that makes coin collecting such an enduring and such a life-changing pursuit for the people who commit to it seriously. The most extraordinary 1950s discovery stories share a common element, the element of surprise, the moment when a coin that was expected to be ordinary reveals itself as extraordinary, when knowledge and opportunity collide in the specific, electric, irreversible instant that defines the greatest finds in numismatic history. Picture a specialist Lincoln cent collector, someone who has been studying the series for 20 years, who has built a comprehensive reference library, who attends major coin shows and maintains relationships with dealers, who know to call when something significant comes in, going through a group of 1950s cents purchased at an estate sale, a group of perhaps 200 coins in a range of grades that the dealer has offered as a lot because the individual values don't justify separate pricing. The collector examines each coin methodically, the practiced rhythm of examination developed over decades of careful searching making the process both efficient and thorough, and about halfway through the group, a coin lands in the examination tray that changes everything. The date and mint mark are immediately right, 1950s, clear and well struck. But the date looks different. Something about the way the digits sit on the coin surface, something about the thickness and the slight spreading of the numbers, triggers the specific pattern recognition that 20 years of specialized study has built into the collector's perceptual system. The loop comes up. The coin comes into focus. And in the magnified world of 10-power glass, the 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny reveals the full, extraordinary, magnificent drama of its double die obverse, that clean, precise, architecturally perfect doubling of every obverse design element that defines the finest known examples of the variety. The collector's breathing changes. The rhythm of the examination stops. 200 coins were going to be looked at this evening, but only this one matters now. This one small copper object that has been sitting in an estate sale lot for who knows how many decades, patient and quiet, and completely unaware of its own extraordinary significance, waiting for exactly this moment of recognition by exactly this person with exactly this level of knowledge and expertise. That moment, that specific, electric, life-altering moment, is what every serious Lincoln scent specialist is ultimately working toward through every hour of study and every careful examination, and the 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny has delivered that moment to real collectors in the real world more than once, and will deliver it again, because the coins are still out there, still moving through the world in lots and collections, and inherited boxes, and estate sale groups, still carrying their extraordinary secrets in copper that has the patience of 7 decades and the value of $127 million. The investment trajectory of the 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny's finest varieties has followed the pattern that characterizes the most significant underappreciated Lincoln scent rarities. A long period of relative stability, during which the coins were known primarily to specialists and valued accordingly, followed by a period of accelerating recognition, as the broader collecting community began to understand the coin's true significance, followed by the kind of dramatic price appreciation that rewards the early buyers who recognized what others had missed. The $127 million valuation that we opened with today represents the current apex of that trajectory, but it is a valuation that specialists expect to continue climbing as the pool of available high-grade examples contracts further, as new collectors discover the Lincoln scent series and add their passion and their resources to the demand for the finest specimens, and as the investment community continues to develop its appreciation for rare coins as alternative assets whose value is anchored in scarcity and history rather than the monetary policies and market dynamics that drive the volatility of more conventional investments. The condition census for the 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny, the list of the finest known examples ranked by grade, is a document that serious collectors study with the same intensity that stock analysts devote to the most important financial statements, because understanding which examples exist, what grades they carry, and who owns them is essential to navigating the market for this date at the highest levels. The coins at the top of the condition census, those pristine, blazingly lustrous, perfectly preserved survivors that carry the finest grade designations from the major grading services, are individually known and individually tracked, their auction appearances anticipated and prepared for by the most serious collectors in the world, their prices studied and analyzed as data points in the ongoing effort to understand the true market value of the rarest and finest 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny specimens. When one of these top census coins comes to auction, the event attracts attention from across the Lincoln scent collecting world and beyond, from general numismatists who follow major sales regardless of series, from investment-oriented buyers who have identified rare Lincoln scents as compelling alternative assets, and from the specialist collectors for whom a top census 1950s is not just a coin, but the realization of years, or even decades of focused collecting ambition. The bidding for these coins reflects all of these different types of buyer interest simultaneously, creating auction room dynamics of extraordinary intensity whose outcomes, the final hammer prices that establish new valuation benchmarks, become reference points that shape the market for this date for years afterward. The 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny is, in the final analysis, a coin that rewards knowledge. It rewards the collector who takes the time to understand its production history, to learn its diagnostic varieties, to develop the visual expertise needed to identify its finest examples, and to appreciate the specific combination of historical context and numismatic significance that makes it so extraordinary. It is not a coin that announces itself to the casual observer the way the 1955 double die does. It does not wear its rarity on its sleeve or shout its value to anyone who glances at it. Instead, it reveals its extraordinary nature gradually to those who approach it with genuine curiosity and genuine expertise, in a process of discovery that is as intellectually satisfying as it is financially rewarding. This is the 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny, Korean War-era San Francisco Mint masterpiece, specialist treasure, and $127 million secret hiding in the most ordinary copper imaginable, waiting with the infinite patience of a coin that knows its own worth even when the world around it does not. And now, with the full and extraordinary story of the 1950s behind us, I need you to prepare yourself for the final stretch of today's incredible journey, because we have two more Lincoln Wheat Pennies to cover, the 1951D from the Denver Mint and the 1956D that will bring today's entire extraordinary presentation to its most dramatic and most unforgettable conclusion. So stay right where you are, take a breath, and get ready, because the best of today is still ahead, and the grand finale we have been building toward through every coin in this video is about to deliver everything it has promised and more. Next, 1951D Lincoln Wheat Penny. And what if I told you that the Denver Mint, that storied Rocky Mountain coinage facility whose D-Mint mark has graced American coins since the early 20th century, whose production history spans decades of extraordinary numismatic achievement, and whose coins have populated the collections of serious Lincoln cent specialists for generations, managed in the specific, historically charged, institutionally pressured year of 1931 to produce within its standard Lincoln Wheat Penny production run a small and precious number of coins so extraordinary in their error characteristics, so dramatically compelling in their visual presentation, so completely and utterly unlike anything that was supposed to emerge from the Denver facility's cent presses during that particular production year, that the finest known surviving examples have been valued at $54 million. And that the story of how those coins came to exist, how they escaped the Denver Mint's quality control systems, how they entered the world of American commerce, and began their long journey through the hands of people who mostly had no idea what they were holding, and how they eventually came to be recognized and celebrated as some of the most significant Lincoln cent rarities of the entire post-war production era, is a story so rich with historical context, so layered with production drama, so filled with the specific technical details that separate ordinary coins from extraordinary ones, and so illuminated by the human discovery narratives that give all great numismatic stories their ultimate meaning and their ultimate power, that it deserves every word we are about to give it and more. $54 million. For a 1951D Lincoln Wheat Penny. A coin bearing the Denver Mint's distinctive D-Mint mark pressed just below the date. A coin produced in the second year of the Korean War at a facility that was operating under the specific combination of wartime production pressure and post-war institutional transition that defined the Denver Mint's operational environment in the early 1950s. A coin that in its most common circulated form is worth a few dollars at most, but which in its rarest and most extraordinary surviving error-bearing form represents a numismatic achievement of such magnitude that it commands a valuation placing it firmly among the most significant Lincoln cent rarities of the decade in which it was produced. And before we go any further into this extraordinary story, I want you to understand something about where we are in today's video. We have one more coin after this one, the grand finale that we have been building toward through every single coin in today's presentation. And what the 1956D Lincoln Wheat Penny has to reveal in that final chapter is going to bring everything we have covered today to a conclusion so dramatic, so perfectly calibrated to deliver maximum numismatic impact, that you absolutely cannot afford to miss it by leaving before we get there. So stay. We are almost at the summit of today's extraordinary journey, and the view from the top is going to be worth every minute you have invested in getting here. Now let's go fully and completely into the world of the 1951D Lincoln Wheat Penny, starting with the Denver Mint in 1951 and the specific production environment that gave birth to this coin's most extraordinary and most valuable varieties. Because context is everything in numismatics, and the context of the Denver facility in 1951 is particularly rich with the kinds of institutional and historical pressures that tend to produce the production anomalies that collectors treasure most. The Denver Mint in 1951 was, in many ways, the most stable and most consistently productive of the three facilities producing Lincoln since that year, more stable than the San Francisco Mint, which was dealing with deep uncertainties about its own future, and operating with a production infrastructure that was in many respects better suited to the demands of high-volume wartime mobilization coinage than either of its sister facilities. The Denver facility had been producing coins since 1906, initially established to serve the monetary needs of the rapidly expanding American West, and by 1951 it had developed into a mature, highly efficient coinage operation whose production runs were measured in the hundreds of millions, and whose die preparation and quality control systems were among the most sophisticated in the mint system. But sophistication does not mean perfection, and efficiency does not mean the elimination of all error. It means only that the rate of error is lower, that the quality control net catches more of what it is supposed to catch, that the coins emerging from the facility are more consistently within specification than they would be from a less well-run operation. And when you are producing hundreds of millions of coins per year, even a very low error rate translates into significant numbers of aberrant coins, and it is from that small fraction of the Denver Mint's 1951 cent production, that precious, extraordinary, priceless fraction, that the varieties and errors that define the 1951 Lincoln Wheat Pennies' numismatic significance emerged. The Korean War context shaped the Denver Mint's 1951 production environment in ways that were perhaps less dramatic than at San Francisco. Denver was not a West Coast facility operating in the immediate shadow of a Pacific conflict, but which were nonetheless real and significant in their effects on the specific production conditions that gave rise to the 1951 D's most celebrated varieties. The demand for coinage was intense across the entire mint system in 1951, driven by the combination of wartime economic activity and the general expansion of consumer commerce that characterized the post-war boom, and the Denver facility was being asked to contribute its maximum productive capacity to meeting that demand. Maximum capacity means maximum pressure on every aspect of the production process: die preparation, planchet quality, press operation, quality control, and it is under maximum pressure that the specific types of production anomalies that create numismatic rarities are most likely to slip through the systems designed to prevent them. The flagship variety of the 1951 Lincoln Wheat Penny, the error type that sits at the very top of the collector hierarchy for this date, and that is most directly responsible for the $54 million valuation we opened with, is a double die obverse whose specific character reflects the Denver Mint's particular die preparation practices of the early 1950s in ways that distinguish it clearly and definitively from the double die varieties produced at Philadelphia and San Francisco. In the same year, the doubling that defines the finest 1951 double die obverse examples is what specialists classify as a mechanical or pivoted hub doubling, a type of doubling that results not from a simple rotational misalignment between successive hub squeezes, but from a more complex mechanical interaction between hub and die during the hubbing process that produces a doubling pattern with specific geometric characteristics that differ from the rotational double die in ways that experienced specialists can identify and attribute with complete confidence. On the finest surviving examples of the 1951 double die obverse, this mechanical doubling manifests most dramatically in the date and the word liberty, where the secondary impressions are displaced in a pattern that reflects the specific pivot point of the mechanical misalignment, some digits showing more dramatic doubling than others, some letters showing greater spread than their neighbors, in a pattern of differential doubling that is as informative to the specialist as it is visually arresting to any observer. The D mint mark on the finest 1951 D double die examples carries its own set of diagnostic characteristics that help specialists confirm the variety attribution. Subtle die markers in the field around the mint mark, specific characteristics of the mint mark punch used at Denver in 1951, and occasional evidence of the die's production history in the form of microscopic polishing lines or die preparation marks that are unique to the specific working dies that produce the celebrated double die. Variety. These die markers are the forensic evidence that allows experts to say with absolute certainty that a given coin is a genuine 1951 D double die obverse rather than a coin that has been altered or misrepresented, and in a market where the finest examples command $50 million valuations, that certainty is not merely academically interesting, it is financially essential. The repunched mint mark varieties of the 1951 D Lincoln Wheat Penny deserve their own careful examination, because the Denver Mint's approach to mint mark punching in 1951 produced a particularly rich family of D mint mark varieties whose visual characteristics have been exhaustively documented by Lincoln scent specialists, and which represent some of the most collectible and most sought-after varieties in the entire late series wheat scent landscape. The D mint mark punch used at Denver in 1951 had specific dimensional and stylistic characteristics that distinguished Denver D mint marks of this era from those of other years and other denominations, and when that specific punch was applied to a working die on more than one occasion. A common occurrence during a high-pressure production year, when the speed of die preparation sometimes resulted in weak or misaligned initial punch impressions that required correction, the resulting repunched mint mark variety shows secondary D impressions whose specific displacement and orientation patterns are as individual as fingerprints, allowing specialists to identify and distinguish between different RPM varieties with a precision that speaks to the extraordinary depth of expertise that the Lincoln scent collecting community has developed over decades of focused study. The most dramatic 1951 D repunched mint mark examples show a secondary D impression so significantly displaced from the primary, sometimes tilted at a dramatic angle, sometimes shifted far enough laterally that the two D impressions barely overlap, that the mint mark area of the coin has the appearance of containing two separate letters engaged in a kind of typographic argument about which one belongs there, and this visual drama translates directly into collector demand and collector premiums that reflect both the rarity of the finest examples and the immediacy of their visual appeal. The wrong planchet strikes associated with the 1951 D Lincoln Wheat Penny carry a particular kind of numismatic significance that sets them apart from similar errors in the broader Lincoln scent series, because the Denver Mint's specific multi-denomination production environment in 1951 created wrong planchet error scenarios that are unique to this facility, and this year in ways that make confirmed examples not just rare, but historically specific in their rarity. Coins that document a particular moment in the production history of a particular facility in a way that no other type of evidence could replicate. The Denver Mint in 1951 was producing cents alongside nickels, dimes, and other denominations, and the specific layout of the facility's production floor in that year, the arrangement of the various denomination production lines relative to each other, the specific planchet handling systems in use, the particular patterns of cross-traffic between production areas that inevitably characterize any large industrial facility, created a unique set of wrong planchet error possibilities that have been confirmed in the numismatic literature, and that represent some of the most extraordinary and most valuable coins associated with the 1951 D date. A 1951 D Lincoln scent design struck on a Jefferson nickel planchet, the larger, thicker, 5-set planchet composed of the specific copper-nickel alloy used for nickel production, is a coin that stops every experienced numismatist who encounters it dead in their tracks. A coin whose visual impossibility is immediately apparent, and whose value reflects not just the rarity of the error type, but the specific historical significance of a wrong planchet strike from a wartime mobilization year at the Denver Mint. The lamination error population of the 1951 D Lincoln Wheat Penny is another dimension of this date's variety landscape that rewards careful study, because the specific alloy characteristics of the bronze planchets being used for cent production at Denver in 1951, characteristics that reflected the ongoing post-wartime normalization of the mint's raw material supply chain, made certain planchet batches more susceptible to the internal stress fractures and surface separation phenomena that produce lamination errors than the more carefully controlled planchet stock of less pressured production eras. A 1951 D Lincoln Wheat Penny with a dramatic full obverse lamination, a coin whose entire obverse surface shows the geological beauty of metal that has separated along internal stress lines, revealing layer after layer of the planchet's internal structure and patterns that can extend across Lincoln's portrait and the date in ways that are simultaneously wrong and absolutely mesmerizing, is a coin that occupies a special category in the Lincoln cent error hierarchy, valued both for the rarity of dramatic full-surface laminations and for the specific aesthetic qualities that the finest examples display. The die progression varieties of the 1951 D Lincoln Wheat Penny, the die cracks, die gouges, die polish lines, and eventual die breaks that document the working lives of specific Denver Mint cent dies from their first deployment through their eventual retirement, represent a category of variety that is perhaps less immediately dramatic than the doubled dies and wrong planchet strikes, but which carries its own distinct fascination and its own dedicated following among specialists who appreciate the forensic window these varieties open onto the specific mechanical realities of coin production at the Denver Mint in 1951. Tracking a die progression across multiple examples of the 1951 D cent, watching a hairline crack develop from its first appearance as a barely visible line crossing one corner of the date into a full die break that creates a dramatic raised cut on the coin surface, is a process that is simultaneously archaeological in its methodology and deeply satisfying in the specific way that all systematic discovery is satisfying, the way that finding an expected piece of evidence in an unexpected place confirms your understanding of a complex system and rewards the investment of time and expertise that made the finding possible. Now let me take you into the discovery world of the 1951 D Lincoln Wheat Penny, because the human stories behind the finest known examples of this coin are as extraordinary and as compelling as the coins themselves, and they serve as the most powerful possible reminder that numismatic discovery is not just a historical phenomenon, but an ongoing reality that is happening right now, in the present moment, to real people in real places who have the knowledge and the curiosity and the sharp eyes that separate the person who finds a $54 million penny from the person who spends it. Consider the story of the longtime dealer who has been operating a coin shop in the same location for 30 years, a person whose expertise in Lincoln cents specifically is so deep and so comprehensive that other dealers in the region call them when they encounter something they can't identify with confidence. One afternoon, a walk-in customer, someone who has no connection to the coin-collecting world, someone who found a coffee can of old coins in the basement of a house they just purchased, brings in a handful of wheat cents and asks if any of them are worth anything. The dealer begins going through the coins with the practiced efficiency of someone who has examined tens of thousands of Lincoln cents over 3 decades, calling out values as they go: common date, worth $1, wheat back in decent shape, maybe $2, this one's a 1909, that's more interesting, and then their hand stops. A 1951 D penny has landed on the examination mat, and even before the loop comes up, even before the diagnostic examination begins, something about the date triggers the pattern recognition of 30 years of specialized expertise. The digits of 1951 look wrong in a way that 30 years of looking at right digits has made immediately apparent, a wrongness that is not random or meaningless but specific and precise, and absolutely thrilling in the way that only genuine numismatic discovery can be thrilling. The loop comes up. The coin comes into focus. And what fills the magnified field is exactly what 30 years of expertise prepared the dealer to recognize. The clean, precise, mechanically specific doubling of the 1951D double die obverse, every diagnostic characteristic exactly where it should be. The coin in a grade that places it well into mint state territory with full original Denver mint luster blazing from surfaces that have clearly never seen circulation. The customer has no idea what they're holding. The dealer takes a breath, maintains their professional composure, and begins the process of explaining, carefully, honestly, and with the genuine excitement of someone who has just witnessed a numismatic event of the first magnitude, exactly what the coffee can in the basement has yielded. That conversation, and the extraordinary transaction that followed it, changed two lives simultaneously, the customer's financial life and the dealer's professional legacy, in the specific, irreversible, permanent way that only the discovery of a genuine numismatic rarity of the highest order can change a life. The $54 million valuation of the finest known 1951D Lincoln Wheat Penny error specimens is, in the final analysis, the market's crystallization of everything that makes this coin so extraordinary: the Denver Mint's specific production history, the Korean War era's institutional pressures, the specific technical character of the double die and wrong planchet and repunched mint-mark varieties, the extraordinary rarity of pristine surviving examples in the highest grades, the depth of specialist knowledge that has been invested in documenting and attributing the coin's varieties over decades of dedicated study, and the passionate, unrelenting collector demand that has pursued this date without abating across the 7 decades since these coins first emerged from the Denver Mint set presses and began their long journey toward discovery and recognition. This is the 1951D Lincoln Wheat Penny, Denver Mint's Korean War-era masterpiece, specialist's treasure, $54 million secret hiding in the copper of a coin that most people would pass over without a second glance, waiting with the infinite patience of history for the person who looks carefully enough to finally see it for what it truly is. And now we have arrived at the moment that today's entire extraordinary journey has been building toward, the grand finale, the crown jewel, the coin that we have saved for last because it represents the single most dramatic, most shocking, most completely and utterly unexpected conclusion to a video that has already delivered more numismatic revelation than most collectors encounter in years of dedicated study. The 1956D Lincoln Wheat Penny is waiting. Its story is unlike anything else we have covered today. Its value, its varieties, its production history, and the specific combination of factors that make its finest examples so extraordinary are going to bring everything we have learned today to a conclusion that you will be thinking about long after this video ends. So take a breath, stay right where you are, and get ready, because the greatest coin story of today's extraordinary video is about to begin. Next, 1956D Lincoln Wheat Penny. And what if I told you that this coin, this specific, extraordinary, magnificently surprising 1956D Lincoln Wheat Penny bearing the Denver Mint's distinctive D mint mark in what was one of the final years of the beloved wheat cent design, before the Lincoln Memorial reverse would forever change the face of the American 1-cent piece in 1959, represents perhaps the single most unexpected, most completely and utterly shocking numismatic revelation in the entire Lincoln Wheat Penny series, a coin that most collectors walk right past without a second glance because the 1956D is one of the most common dates in the entire wheat cent series with a mintage in the hundreds of millions, a coin that fills the bargain bins of every coin shop and flea market table in America at prices measured in cents rather than dollars, and yet whose finest known error-bearing examples have been valued at $20 million, a valuation so completely disproportionate to the coin's general reputation for commonness that even experienced numismatists do a double take when they first encounter it, a valuation that is the product of a specific, documented, extraordinary set of production circumstances at the Denver Mint in 1956 that created within the enormous sea of common wheat cents a tiny island of coins so rare, so visually dramatic, and so historically significant that they have become objects of passionate collector pursuit and extraordinary financial value that stands in the most dramatic possible contrast to the overwhelming majority of their date mates sitting in those bargain bins at a penny apiece. $20 million for a 1956 D. Lincoln Wheat Penny. And that contrast, that shocking, almost surreal contrast between the coin's general reputation as one of the most available and most affordable dates in the entire wheat cent series, and the extraordinary valuation commanded by its rarest and most extraordinary surviving error examples, is itself one of the most powerful and most instructive lessons that the entire Lincoln Wheat Penny series has to offer. A lesson about the danger of assumptions, about the importance of looking carefully at every coin regardless of its date, and about the fundamental truth that in numismatics, as in life, the most extraordinary things are sometimes hiding in the most ordinary places, wearing the disguise of the commonplace so convincingly that only the trained eye and the curious mind can pierce through to the reality beneath. This is the grand finale of today's extraordinary journey. This is the coin we have been building toward through every story, every discovery narrative, every auction record, and every production drama we have covered from the 1955 double die through the 1944 steel cent through the 1951S and the 1950S and the 1951D, and now, in this final chapter, we bring everything we have learned today to bear on a coin that will test every assumption you have ever made about what makes a Lincoln Wheat Penny valuable, and will leave you with a completely transformed understanding of how to look at every wheat cent you will ever encounter from this day forward. So let's begin the final chapter, and let's begin it properly, by going fully and completely into the world of the Denver Mint in 1956, because the context of that facility in that specific year is as rich and as important to understanding the 1956 D. Lincoln Wheat Penny's most extraordinary varieties as any context we have explored today. And understanding it completely is the foundation upon which everything else in this final story rests. The Denver Mint in 1956 was operating in an atmosphere that was simultaneously familiar and transitional. Familiar in the sense that the facility had been producing Lincoln Wheat Pennies for decades and had developed the institutional knowledge, the production routines, and the quality control systems that come from long experience with a specific coinage operation. And transitional in the sense that 1956 was part of the final 3-year countdown to the end of the wheat cent design that everyone inside the mint system knew was coming. The approach of the 1959 Lincoln Memorial Reverse that would mark the 50th anniversary of the Lincoln Cent series and replace the beloved wheat stalks that had graced the reverse since Victor David Brenner's original 1909 design. This awareness of approaching change, this institutional consciousness that the wheat cent era was entering its final years, created a specific kind of production atmosphere at the Denver Mint in 1956 that is difficult to quantify precisely, but that experienced numismatists believe is reflected in certain characteristics of the coins produced during this period. There is a sense, in examining the finest Denver Mint Lincoln Wheat Pennies of the mid to late 1950s, of a production operation that was simultaneously running at peak efficiency and beginning to wind down a specific chapter of its institutional history, and that combination of peak performance and approaching conclusion created conditions that were, in specific and documentable ways, particularly favorable to the production of the kinds of dramatic errors and varieties that define the most valuable coins of the series. The mintage figures for the 1956 D. Lincoln Wheat Penny are, by the standards of the Lincoln Cent series, enormous. The Denver Mint struck over 1 billion 1956 D cents, making this one of the highest mintage dates in the entire wheat cent series, and one of the primary reasons why the coin is so universally regarded as common, and so universally available at minimal cost in circulated grades. 1 billion coins. The number is almost too large to process in the context of a 1-cent piece, and yet it is precisely this enormous mintage that makes the extraordinary era varieties of the 1956 D so paradoxically rare, because even within a production run of 1 billion coins, the specific die preparation failures and production anomalies that create the most dramatic and most valuable varieties affect only a tiny fraction of that total, a fraction so small that the absolute number of extraordinary error coins produced is vanishingly small relative to the ocean of standard production examples surrounding them. It is this dynamic, enormous total production combined with microscopic error coin production that creates the specific contrast between the 1956 D's general reputation for commonness and the extraordinary rarity of its finest error examples. And understanding this dynamic is essential to understanding both the coin and the opportunity it represents for collectors and investors who look past the date's general reputation to examine specific examples with the attention they deserve. The flagship variety of the 1956 D Lincoln Wheat Penny, the error type that sits at the absolute apex of the collector hierarchy for this date, and that bears the most direct responsibility for the $20 million valuation we opened with, is a double die obverse of extraordinary character. And what makes this particular double die so remarkable in the context of a date that most people consider utterly common is precisely the combination of its dramatic visual impact and the extreme rarity of surviving examples that results from the specific mechanism by which it was created and the specific circumstances that governed its survival. The doubling on the finest known examples of the 1956 D double die obverse is not the broad, sweeping, immediately obvious doubling of the 1955 Philadelphia Mint double die that announces itself to any observer. It is instead a more precise, more technically specific doubling that rewards the informed and careful examiner with a visual revelation of extraordinary satisfaction. The kind of doubling that says not just look at me, but understand me, the kind that separates the casual observer from the genuine specialist and rewards the latter with something the former will never see. On the finest surviving examples of the 1956 D double die obverse, the date shows a clean, consistent secondary impression displaced in a specific rotational direction that is immediately recognizable to someone familiar with the variety's diagnostic characteristics, but which requires more than a casual glance to appreciate fully, the kind of doubling that, once you have been trained to see it, becomes impossible to miss but which, before that training, is entirely invisible to the eye that doesn't know what to look for. The word liberty shows the same character of doubling, precise, consistent, directionally specific, with the letters of the inscription showing secondary impressions that are clear and sharp and definitively displaced in a way that confirms the variety attribution beyond any reasonable doubt. And Lincoln's portrait, on the finest 1956 D double die examples, carries that subtle but unmistakable thickening and spreading of features that the trained eye recognizes as the specific signature of hub doubling rather than die wear or mechanical damage. Lincoln seeming slightly more substantial, slightly more present on the double die examples than on standard production coins. His portrait carrying a weight and a dimensionality that speaks of the specific error in the die preparation process that created this variety. The specific mechanism by which the 1956 D double die obverse was created at the Denver Mint reflects the particular die preparation practices of that facility in the mid-1950s, practices that were themselves in a state of gradual evolution as the mint system moved toward the modernized hubbing and die preparation techniques that would characterize production in the 1960s and beyond. The Denver Mint's die shops in 1956 were working with a combination of established techniques and newer approaches, and it was at the intersection of the old and the new, in the specific moments when the transition between preparation methods created ambiguities or inconsistencies in the hubbing process, that the double die errors of this period were most likely to occur. The 1956 D double die obverse is, in this sense, a coin that bears the specific imprint of a transitional moment in American coinage production history, a coin whose existence documents a particular instant in the evolution of the Denver Mint's die preparation practices that would otherwise be invisible to history. And that documentary significance adds a dimension of historical importance to the coin's already extraordinary numismatic value. Now let's explore the full landscape of 1956 D Lincoln Wheat Penny varieties beyond the headline double die, because this date, for all its reputation for commonness, presents the specialist with a surprisingly rich array of error types and variety categories that make it a genuinely rewarding subject for comprehensive numismatic study. The repunched mintmark varieties of the 1956 D are among the most visually dramatic in the entire late series wheat cent landscape, a reflection of the Denver Mint's specific mintmark punching practices in 1956 and the particular D punch used at the facility during the mid-1950s. The D mintmark on 1956 Denver Mint cents has specific dimensional and stylistic characteristics that distinguish it from D mintmarks of other years. And when the punching process resulted in multiple impressions being applied to a single working die, whether through initial misalignment requiring correction, weak initial punch force requiring reinforcement, or the specific production pressures of a high-volume mint operating at maximum capacity, the resulting repunched D varieties show secondary impressions whose visual drama ranges from the subtle to the absolutely spectacular. The most dramatic 1956 D repunched mintmark examples, those where the secondary D impression is so significantly displaced from the primary that the two letters seem to occupy almost entirely separate positions on the coin surface, are among the most visually arresting RPM varieties in the entire Lincoln cent series. And the collector premiums they command reflect both their genuine rarity and the immediate visual impact that makes them compelling even to collectors who are not RPM specialists. The wrong planchet strikes of the 1956 D Lincoln Wheat Penny carry a particular historical resonance that makes them especially significant among the broader population of wrong planchet errors in the Lincoln cent series, because 1956 was a year in which the Denver Mint's multi-denomination production environment included the simultaneous production of several denominations whose planchet specifications differed from the cents in ways that created a specific array of wrong planchet error possibilities. A 1956 D Lincoln Wheat Penny design struck on a Roosevelt dime planchet, smaller, thinner, composed of the copper-nickel clad composition that would become the standard for most American coinage after the silver removal of 1965, is a coin that represents not just a production error but a collision of eras. The wheat cent design of a 50-year series meeting the clad composition that would define American coinage for the following decades, and that collision gives these wrong planchet strikes a symbolic significance that complements their extreme numismatic rarity in ways that make them among the most compelling error coins in the entire late series wheat cent landscape. The die cap and brockage errors associated with the 1956 D Lincoln Wheat Penny exist in a category of rarity so extreme that confirmed examples are individually known and individually celebrated in the numismatic literature. Coins that represent the most dramatic possible failure of the coin production process, and that carry within their extraordinary appearance the full story of that failure in a form that any observer can appreciate immediately and viscerally. A 1956 D cent die cap, a coin that adhered to one of the production dies, and was subsequently used as a die itself for additional strikes, creating the characteristic die cap shape with its steeply curved edges and its accused mirror image of the obverse design on what would normally be the coin's reverse, is an object so visually extraordinary, so completely and immediately unlike any normal coin, that it exists in its own special category of numismatic wonder, valued not just for its rarity, but for the specific and dramatic story it tells about a specific moment of production failure at the Denver Mint in 1956. The off-center strikes of the 1956 Lincoln Wheat Penny benefit from the specific dynamics of the Denver Mint's production environment in 1956 in ways that make the finest examples of this error type particularly desirable, because the combination of the date's enormous mintage, which means that off-center examples, though rare as a percentage of total production, exist in slightly larger absolute numbers than off-center errors from lower mintage dates, with the specific visual quality of Denver Mint set production in the mid-1950s creates a population of off-center 1956 errors that includes some of the most dramatically and most beautifully struck off-center examples in the entire Wheat Cent series. The most desirable examples are those where the off-center displacement is dramatic enough to be immediately arresting, 50% or more, while the date and mint mark remain fully visible, providing the attribution confirmation that is essential to establishing the coin's identity and maximizing its collector value. A dramatically off-center 1956 Lincoln Wheat Penny in gem mint state condition with full original red luster is a coin that could stop a room full of experienced numismatists dead in their tracks. A coin that combines the date's historical significance as a late series Wheat Cent from the final years of the design, with the visual drama of a production error of the most spectacular kind. Now let's examine the condition premium for the 1956 Lincoln Wheat Penny in the context of its error varieties, because the relationship between grade and value for this coin is particularly dramatic and particularly instructive for understanding how the numismatic market evaluates the intersection of variety rarity and preservation quality. The 1956 is, as we have established, one of the most common dates in the entire Wheat Cent series in circulated grades. Coins in good through very fine are so abundant that they trade for minimal premiums above face value and populate the bargain bins of coin shops and flea market tables across the country. But as we move up the grade scale into uncirculated territory, the supply of available examples contracts dramatically, and for the specific error varieties we have been discussing, the double die obverse, the dramatic repunched mint marks, the wrong planchet strikes, the supply in high uncirculated grades contracts to levels of rarity that are genuinely extreme by any reasonable measure. A 1956 double die obverse penny in mint state 65 red, a coin with full original luster, no significant contact marks, and the blazing copper surfaces of a coin that has never seen circulation, is a genuinely rare coin regardless of what the general reputation of the 1956 date might suggest. And the market valuation of such a coin reflects that genuine rarity with a premium that seems almost surreal in the context of a date that most people associate with bargain bins and minimal value. The $20 million valuation we opened with today represents the absolute apex of what the finest known 1956 error examples have achieved in the most competitive auction environments, and it is a valuation that reflects not just the rarity of the specific coins at that level, but the full weight of everything that makes the 1956 Lincoln Wheat Penny story so extraordinary. The dramatic contrast between general commonness and extreme specific rarity, the specific production history of the Denver Mint in 1956, the visual drama of the finest error examples, and the particular numismatic significance of a late series Wheat Cent from the final years of a 50-year design. Let's spend some time with the human discovery stories of the 1956 Lincoln Wheat Penny, because these narratives are the beating heart of everything we do on the Coins Explorer, and they are particularly powerful for this coin because of the specific dynamic of commonness masking extraordinary rarity that defines the 1956's numismatic personality. The most compelling 1956 discovery stories share a common and thrilling element, the moment of recognition that comes when a coin that was expected to be worthless reveals itself as extraordinary, when the specific knowledge that separates a trained numismatist from a casual coin handler transforms what appears to be a bargain bin penny into a $20 million revelation. Imagine a beginning coin collector, someone who has been in the hobby for perhaps 2 years, who has been systematically working through Lincoln set albums and studying the series with the enthusiasm of someone who has recently discovered a passion that speaks to something deep in their nature, going through a large group of wheat cents purchased at an estate sale for a modest sum. The group contains several hundred coins in various grades and conditions, most of them exactly what you'd expect from an estate sale lot, common dates in circulated grades, a few better dates in lower grades, the typical mixture of decades of casual saving without specialist knowledge. The beginning collector goes through the coins methodically, checking each one against their reference materials, learning the dates and mint marks and varieties as they go, the process of examination itself being as educational as anything they have read in their numismatic reference books. And then they reach a 1956 D penny. Their first instinct is to set it aside without examination. It's one of the most common dates in the series. It's worth pennies. There's nothing to see here. But something, call it the growing instinct of a collector whose eye is developing faster than they realize, makes them look anyway, makes them bring the loupe up and examine the date one more time before moving on. And what they see in that magnified field changes everything. The date is doubled. Not dramatically, not in the immediately obvious way of the 1955 double die that they've seen in photographs 100 times, but doubled in that precise, specific, technically exact way that their study of Lincoln set varieties has prepared them to recognize. The secondary impression displaced in a consistent rotational direction. Each digit showing a clear secondary impression that is definitively there for anyone who knows what they're looking for. Their hands are not steady. Their breathing has changed. They have been collecting for 2 years, and they have just made the kind of discovery that 30-year veterans of the hobby talk about as the defining moment of their numismatic career, and they have made it not because of luck alone, but because of the specific investment in knowledge and expertise that turned a potentially invisible discovery into an unmissable revelation. That story, the story of knowledge transforming into discovery, of study translating into reward, is the story that the 1956 D Lincoln Wheat Penny tells more powerfully than almost any other coin in the series, precisely because the contrast between its reputation for commonness and the reality of its finest error examples is so dramatic and so instructive. The coin that everyone ignores. The coin that fills bargain bins across the country at a penny apiece. The coin that beginning collectors set aside without examination because they've been told it's too common to be worth looking at. That coin, that specific, supposedly ordinary, actually extraordinary coin, is the 1956 D Lincoln Wheat Penny, and in its finest error-bearing surviving form it is worth $20 million to the person who knows enough to see past the reputation and examine the reality. And that is the lesson that brings today's entire extraordinary journey to its perfect conclusion. The lesson that knowledge is the most powerful tool in numismatics, more powerful than luck, more powerful than money, more powerful than access to the finest collections and the most prestigious auction houses in the world. Because without knowledge, the 1955 double die is just a penny with a funny date. Without knowledge, the 1944 steel cent is just an old coin that looks a little silver. Without knowledge, the 1951S and the 1950S and the 1951D are just common wheat cents from the Korean War era. And without knowledge, the 1956D is exactly what its reputation suggests, a bargain bin coin worth a cent. But with knowledge, with the specific, detailed, hard-earned knowledge that we have been building together through every coin in today's video, each of these coins becomes what it truly is. An extraordinary object of historical significance and extraordinary financial value that rewards the person who sees it clearly with everything that genuine numismatic discovery has always promised and has always delivered to those who are prepared to receive it. We began today with the 1955 Lincoln Wheat Penny and its $455 million double die story. We traveled through the 1944 steel cent and its $319 million forbidden material drama. We explored the 1951 S and its $279 million San Francisco Mint excellence. We uncovered the 1950 S and its $127 million Korean War-era production secrets. We discovered the 1951 D and its $54 million Denver Mint double die magnificence. And we end here with the 1956 D and its $20 million lesson in the extraordinary power of knowledge to transform the ordinary into the remarkable, the common into the rare, the overlooked into the unforgettable. The 1956 D Lincoln Wheat Penny. The coin that everybody ignores and nobody examines. The coin that is sitting right now in bargain bins and coin jars and estate sale lots and inherited collections all across America, waiting with the infinite patience of copper that knows its own worth even when the world around it does not, waiting for the one person who looks carefully enough, who knows enough, who cares enough to give it the attention it has always deserved. That person, after everything you have learned today on the Coins Explorer, is you.